This is Doc Ethel inviting everyone to be with us at Pugad Bloggers, Monday to Friday, 7 to 8 in the evening at DZRJ 8:10 a.m. Radyo Bandido TV.
Watch and listen to Pugad Bloggers, Monday to Friday from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Airing on Sky Cable Channel 224 and on all DTT boxes. Simulcasting online on Facebook and YouTube. Listen and watch on your mobile devices. Just search DZRJ Radio Bandido.
Pugad Vloggers, ang kurap titirisin, salot sa bayan wawalisin, walang sasantuhin, ang saya-saya nakakabaliw, kasama natin ang tropa. Pugad Vloggers, Pugad Vloggers.
Okay, good evening mga kababayan natin. Ako po si Orion Perez Dumdum. I'm basically filling in for our resident doctor, si Dr. 𝗕𝗹𝗴𝗲𝗿𝘀. So basically, nandito po ako ngayon dahil yun nga, hindi po siya pwede ngayon. So may special edition po tayo ng ating Pugad Bloggers ngayon. And we also have a special guest. Similar to our Tuesday session, we're doing basically a special on constitutional reform, and we have a special guest similar to last Tuesday. Kaibigan po namin sila, magkakaibigan din po kami, as in last Tuesday ang na-feature po natin ay si Attorney Tony Abad, and today we have a very special guest. His name is Dr. 𝗕𝗹𝗴𝗲 Candido Santos. Sinabi ko yung Candido para alam ng mga tao saan galing ang 𝗕𝗪 Santos. Kasi syempre, pag sinabing Emmanuel, paano naging 𝗕𝗪 yan? Ay, dahil sa Candido. Hindi po ba, Doc? So, para naman, para malaman nila ang koneksyon.
Oh, yeah.
So, yun.
Naman ako sa lolo ko yung name na yun eh.
Candido.
Siya yung nagpahirap sa buhay ko eh. Nag-fill up ng mga form lahat. Ang haba eh.
Ayan. So
Iksi
mga
lang nung
kababayan,
palayaw ko eh.
Ayun.
Pinahaba masyado.
So ito po mga kababayan, our special guest is basically from an illustrious background, masasabi natin. Kasi ang kanyang his late father was actually one of the Constitutional Convention delegates of the convention that created the 1973 Constitution. His father was the late 𝗕𝗪 Professor and Attorney 𝗕𝗪 Santos. No, so those of you who know anything about history, sino yung mga natin, mga big names, kasama po ang ama ng ating special guest doon. Sila rin po yung meron din po silang school na medyo sikat, yung IAME. So sa kanila po 'yon. And our guest tonight, actually, he is he's a PhD. He's an economist, and he has experience as a technocrat. No? Kasi nag-migrate po siya dun sa Australia, and he is actually a high-ranking civil servant in the state of South Australia. So ayun po. So itong guest po natin ngayon, marami po siya talagang alam tungkol dito sa yung mga gusto nating mangyari sa Pilipinas, dahil yung po yung sistema na meron sa Australia at sa kanilang mga estado sa loob ng Australia. So talagang meron siyang in-depth experience at knowledge sa mga ito. So without much further ado, welcome to our special guest. Alam niyo na po ang pangalan niya, Dr. 𝗕𝗪 Santos. At bakit naging 𝗕𝗪 ang pangalan niya? Ang Emmanuel siya, 𝗕𝗹𝗴𝗲 Candido Santos.
Thank you. Salamat, Ryan. Salamat sa yung pagkumbida sa akin dito sa programang to. Alam ko last minute ka rin, no?
Yes.
Yeah. So Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So we're very happy to have you here on our program. And I essentially, I want us to have a very casual conversation. Yung pang pag-uusapan lang natin yung mga madaling maintindihan ng mga ordinaryong Pilipino. At isa sa mga napaka-importanteng mapag-usapan, paano ka napasok sa pagkakaintindi na importante sa Pilipinas na magkaroon tayo nitong constitutional reform, lalo na itong mga yung three main points na kinakailangan, which is yung pagiging bukas sa pagpasok ng foreign investors, federalism, parliamentary system. So yung paano ka napasok dito? Paano, ano ba ang nag-udyok sa'yo na mapasok sa ganitong klaseng advokasya?
Well, alam nyo, Orion, yung ako pinanganak kasi ako 1970, no? So ako yung tinatawag na martial law baby. And yung coming of age ko was syempre during the people power EDSA revolution time ng 86. In fact, you mentioned my father. He is a co-founder with Ninoy nung 1978, yung Lakas ng Bayan, colleague siya nila ni Pimentel, and Cory, sa Central Luzon siya tumakbo noong 1984, leading up to EDSA, naging OIC governor siya ng Nueva Ecija after that time. And then, syempre, ang expectation ng generation ko, or yung mga katulad ko, na may ganong klaseng background, was that things would change, things would improve, for the better. So my father, who actually campaigned for President Marcos, in the 60s, but during the CONCON, he was a sponsor of many bills, including land reform, including the ombudsman. Kaya tayo may ombudsman and Sandigan Bayan ngayon and urban, marami siyang mga ideas na sinusulong. He was also allied with the close friends with Raul Manglapos, that group, and but part of the bloc, the Diosdado Macapagal, because he was the president of the CONCON. So maraming magagandang ideas ng time na yun, and they got squelched when during the transition period, kasi supposedly dapat magkakaroon ng the CONCON was supposed to convert itself into the Batasan, but that was put on hold until 78. Kaya nga all those years parang naka-freeze frame yung mga pinaglalaban niya, so that in 78 he ran with the late Senator Ninoy Aquino Jr. So he allied himself there. Although ninang niya sa kasal si Imelda. Yeah, it's a long story. But anyway, we thought that things would improve. And so high school pa lang ako, 86, the 1990s, the Ramos administration, there was a push for reform, and then that was the first time na naririnig ko yung kailangan magkaroon ng reforma sa Constitution. Like kasi those reforms were starting to cause the country to open up and become more globalized, but they realized that things were just moving too slow under this current system. Ngayon, hindi pa ako kumbinsido nung time na yon. It wasn't until nag-aral ako, nag-grad ng postgrad, and then yung Arroyo years were really difficult for my generation. A lot of us left, bringing our families with us. I was one of those in 2005. So and then I didn't immediately work in the civil service in Australia. I had to work in the private sector. And I worked for a Singaporean immigrant to Australia, and we did business in Singapore and Malaysia. And doon ko nakita yung kaibahan, yung standard nung nung trabaho, yung work ethic, and yung sistema. And then later on, I joined the civil service in the South Australian government in Adelaide. And then as a civil servant, dun ko nakita yung kaibahan ng sistema na umiiral sa Australia. It's both parliamentary and federal. And dun ko nakita yung mga practices namin. Kung kaya't kapag nakikita ko ngayon yung mga deliberations sa ating kongreso, yung mga problema sa Pilipinas, I see it through a different lens now, ano? And then because I know from my lived experience both in the Philippines and then in Australia that things really operate very differently because of the system that is present in both in these two countries, you know. So I then, when I got to know more about the system, I really became convinced that the reason why, one of the reasons why hindi umuunlad yung ating bansa, hindi umuunlad yung ating ekonomiya, and the problems with the civil service. I by the way, I went back to the Philippines in 2014, and during the time of President Noynoy Aquino, as a consultant for the civil service through the Australian aid program. And I pursued some of these reforms for civil service kasi civil servant ako sa Australia, you know. They were trying to, pero I can see why our civil service is so the level of professionalism and career progression and leadership and all of that, between, you know, why the civil service behaves the way it does in the Philippines versus the way it behaves in a different context like Australia. So even if you try to push for reforms, what I'm trying to say is, even though we're trying to transfer these reforms into the Philippines, it's still the overarching structure and system that is the limiting it from being effective. No, parang ganun eh, parang. And now, recently, after my doctoral, pumasok ako, we can talk about this later. That the latest thing that's happened to me, I've enrolled in this course in Harvard, and it's about leading economic growth. The more I became convinced when I heard what was going on in the class. We could talk a little bit more about that later on, perhaps, because that's the latest thing. You know?
Wow.
Grabe talaga. Sabi ko, oh my God. From yung economic provisions ng ating constitution, that's the problem. It's yun yung ugat. And we can talk about maybe some of those things as we, you know, in this hour, siguro.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Maraming salamat dun sa sa pagpaliwanag mo kung bakit nga napasok ka sa ganitong klaseng pagkakaunawa sa system, sa bakit nga may problema tayo sa sistema. Kasi nga talagang it's tayong mga overseas Filipinos, like in my case, nakikita ako sa Singapore din na kitang-kita na may pagkakaiba sa sistema. And that makikita mo naman na actually kung meron tayong ganitong klaseng sistema sa Pilipinas, nakikita ko na actually kaya rin natin kung ano yung nagagawa dito sa Singapore. Nakikita ko kasi mga Pilipino na nandito naman, okay rin, you know, when working within this system, okay naman So parang feeling ko yun yung kulang. And then yun nga, kitang-kita naman natin na yung how things work under yung parliamentary system nila, yung kanilang economic system. They were able to reap all these benefits in Singapore, and it's very similar to what's going on in Australia and other Commonwealth countries that are progressive. Parang there's something with the system that they have that we don't have, 'di ba? Parang kaya tayo na para tayong kotse na gustong magpabilis pero parang naka-handbrake tayo.
Yes,
So
yes.
parang kinakailangan mo ibaba yung handbrake para bumilis
Mm.
tayo, 'di ba? Kaya
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
sayang talaga. So maybe you might want to talk about yung ano, yung sinasabi mo tungkol sa economic stuff and
Sige, okay. Kasi it's good to start there, you know.
oo.
Kasi yung nga yung latest 'di ba sa Senado, si Senator, yung Committee on Constitutional Reform, they were recommending na magkaroon tayo ng economic cha man lang.
Oo, kahit yun lang man lang
Kahit pagpaliban
starting.
muna natin yung shift to parliamentary or federalism, yung economic, ano, kasi
Oo.
mas maraming boto doon daw.
Oo, oo.
No? So yun yung ano. So eto, enroll ako. It's a course run by the Kennedy School. So shout out kay Attorney Abad. No?
Oo.
Doon din nag-aral.
Oo nga.
It's run by a group. It's the Center for International Development. They run this thing called the Growth Lab.
Mhm.
And then it's headed by Professor Ricardo Hausman, who came up with the theory of economic complexity. Na siya naman yung actually the one who's pushing for that in the Senate is Senator Sani Angara. Kaya meron siyang bill yung tatak Pinoy na pending sa Senado. I mean, pasado na pala sa Senado, yung House na lang version. But anyway, siya yung progenitor noon along with the guy, Professor Matthew. And mamaya nga, magkaklase kami. Anyway, their theory is very different from the classic theory of economic growth, where normally, I was a student of economics, no, development economics sa UP school. We were taught that your economy, your growth, is a function of capital. Ito yung classic, capital, labor, and what's this? Financial capital, labor, and then later on it was extended human capital
Human capital. Mhm.
and intellectual, innovation, technology, ganyan. He calls that the Earth, Wind, and Fire model. Parang yung very primitive model na sa kanya. Yung sa kanya, it's every single product is to make a watch. There is a lot of know-how that goes into a watch.
Mhm.
Diba? Watchmaker. How do you become a watchmaker? Ito yung classic ano niya. How do you become a watchmaker in a land where there are no watches? And why would you become a watchmaker in a land where there are no watches? Yun yung classic in a developing country, di ba? Gagawa ka ng kotse puro yung mga puro owner type jeep pang sinasakyan, di ba? Bakit ka gagawa ng kotse dito? O gagawa ka ng eroplano? Yung mga ganon. So it's really about transferring that know-how. We often think it's transferring the technology. So we often think, okay, it's getting the foreign investor to come in and bring the capital and the know-how, etc. That's the classic case. So we give them whatever. But it's usually somebody with the know-how who comes over. Classic cases like Singapore. So Singapore developed not because of the local Chinese merchants. It was because of the Chinese from Shanghai who left China during the Civil War in China when the communists and the nationalists were at war, ended up in Singapore. It was them combined with the British multinationals who collaborated and combined because the local merchants, they just did what they knew. No? It was the influx of these migrants from Shanghai and combined with the British. Merong guys sa King's College London na former Singaporean bureaucrat na nag-aral doon. Nag-present siya. Ganun yung finding. So it's usually somebody because know-how is stored in the brain, sabi niya. It's in the brain. not in a book. You cannot codify this know-how. It's different from that. It's not knowledge, it's know-how. Knowledge that can be easily codified in a book. You don't learn how to bike by reading a book.
Because it's procedural. It's procedural knowledge.
Procedural knowledge.
Procedural knowledge.
It's not propositional knowledge.
Yeah,
Na pwede bang A equals B, whatever.
It's
So,
there's a certain muscle memory involved
Correct.
in it. There's a certain
So tayo, look, tayo mga Pilipino, ang dami nating mga degree, graduate ng university. Ang dami nating pinoproduce na graduate taon-taon, di ba?
Yeah.
Na supposedly, edi dapat, uunlad dapat tayo dahil ang classic na ano natin, bakit mayaman ng mga Westerners, dahil mas marunong sila. So we thought, okay, pag-aralin natin ang mga Pilipino, and yayaman tayo. But what has ended up happening? Walang oportunidad dito, so nangingibang bansa na lang sila.
Bansa,
So the thing is, it's the know-how, because the educated, they still don't have the know-how.
Exactly.
They've been educated with books.
Just to interject, no, I remember even so the late 𝗕𝗂𝗴𝗏 and even Mahathir Mohamad and Lee Kuan Yew both said similar things about why they had to rely on bringing in foreign direct investors, no, people with know-how. Kasi they both said that their problem was in both their societies, in Singapore and in Malaysia, their local capitalists, their local businessmen were essentially traders, buy and sell only, and that's what they wanted to do. They didn't want to go into industry. They didn't want to do manufacturing. They didn't want to do that kind of stuff, and they wanted to stay within their comfort zone.
Yes.
And so that's why they said, we have no choice. We really needed to just bring in as many investors as possible, and investors that were all probably in the same field, similar fields that would form a kind of supply chain. You know, but one would supply this small component that's needed by this other company. So it's a huge group of companies that need to come in.
Yes.
Parang ganon.
So from that, kasi we often think yung foreign investor, kaya lang kailangan siya dahil sa pera.
Hindi nila alam na actually it's procedural knowledge.
Mas importante yung... So how do you acquire the know-how? Sabi yung, it can either happen kung yung overseas diaspora mo, yung mga nang ibang bansa na national dito, ay babalik at dadalhin nila yon. Evidence comes from Mexico, where in certain towns na people have migrated to the US and then come back, the same industry where they were employed in the US suddenly becomes booming in that town in Mexico. So yun yung evidence na sinasite ni Hausman, no? So either that, yung return migration ng mga diaspora mo, yung overseas Filipinos, or mag-i-import ka ng foreign national who has the know-how. But the problem is, and this was cited by Hausman, you know, Hausman was expelled by his own country.
From Venezuela.
He was the former finance minister ng Venezuela pre-Chavez.
Pre-Chavez. Chavez kasi was, well, of course, Marxist.
He is actually persona non grata.
Yeah.
Ngayon, but he says, in Harvard, lahat sila, mga foreign, in developing countries, they usually restrict yung mga foreign nationals from participating in the high-end like professions, engineers. To become an engineer or like an accountant or like a lawyer in their countries, usually that is restricted. But then they allow the low-level migrants to come in, like refugees and so forth. So they're actually they've got it in reverse. Ang sabi niya. For you to benefit from the technical know-how, you have to allow them to bring in the technical know-how. I'll give you an example. Recently, there was a friend of mine exit sila from their startup. It's a rum. It's an alcohol business. Okay, it was bought out by a foreign multinational. The reported price in the Financial Times was 430 million euros, I believe. It was just making rum. Now, rum is an age-old, di ba? Cuba, they've all been, and within the Philippines, di ba, may mga local producers tayo ng rum. So in a country saturated by that, how come we were able to produce this new product? All that they did was mix the rum with some kind of new formula, vanilla, but then the packaging and the marketing. How were they able to convert that business na dito sa Pilipinas, magkano lang yung lapad na rum, and naging export ito sa Europe? There was a British guy married to a Filipina. He was the guy who had the know-how. He brought it here in the Philippines. I just introduced him to the sugar growers of Bacolod and said, okay, that's where, and then they'll ferment it here. But it was the guy with the experience. We're not talking about technology or what, high-tech startup. This is a traditional food and beverage thing. No? Yun, 400, magkano yung, that's billions of, they just cashed out. But it was the foreigner who came in with that know-how. No? Ngayon, syempre, if he was just not married or partnered to this Filipina, would they have done that?
He wouldn't have had with the 60-40 in place. Of
course not.
It would not have happened.
Of course not.
But because he was married to a Filipina, then it was possible.
Yeah. Oh, now how many of those companies have not happened or materialized because of the restrictions that we have, which was introduced in the 1935 Constitution and then repeated ever since and expanded.
Expanded in
fact,
the 1887.
Some sectors it's higher than that.
Yeah.
In the 72 Constitution, 86 is the most, 88 is the most, 87 is the most. 87 is the most restrictive. So, yun, how many of those companies could have taken place and provided jobs to thousands, if not millions of Filipinos only because of that rule that we are very restrictive to foreigners. So it's actually our mindset is the problem. It's natural na you would think we have to be nationalistic. We have to prevent these foreigners with a history of colonization. We have to prevent the foreign exploitation of our resources, etc., etc.
Kind of reactionary,
Yeah, but actually, dun ko natutunan dito sa latest na kasi para gawin ito, ang daming bits of know-how ang kailangan mong matutunan . And it's only by bringing in the people with the know-how na mangyayari yon. Without that, you can have a business-friendly climate, you provide infrastructure, you can do all of those things, lower taxes, pero hindi pa rin mangyayari. So like, some of my classmates in this class are coming from like the UAE, like Azerbaijan, where they have practiced those principles, no? But they're saying our economy is now not diversified enough and there's no investment coming in yet. So what is lacking? It's that openness to new ideas, new things, and the people who have them. It's that kind of lacking of openness to new ideas and the people,
and bringing in the people with that expertise.
Bringing in the people who have. If you don't have it, diba? The only way is to bring it to encourage those with the know-how to come here. That's the challenge. That's the challenge.
Yeah, I think I wanted to interject here with the situation with what happened in Meiji, Japan. because a lot of
Yes,
Filipinos seem to like to say
magandang example.
that they keep on saying that, oh no, look at Japan. Japan was able to develop without foreign investment. Well, and then I tell them, wait a minute. They had during the the Tokugawa shogunate, they were able to produce a lot of local domestic wealth. No? So they had a lot of their own high production. Yeah, they were able to produce a lot of domestic wealth. Now, but they just didn't have foreign expertise from Europe and all that. So to be able to produce the kinds of products that they would want to export.
Yes.
And so what they did was eventually, although they were largely domestically funded because they had a lot of, these former landowners, these former merchants, people who were making weaponry and all that, they artisans and all that who were rich. They had people with business skills already. They just didn't have knowledge in modern industry. So trains, factories, and all that stuff. They didn't have that. So what Japan did, Meiji Japan did, was they got these, what they call oyatoi gaikokujin. So the hired foreigners, they hired and paid very good salaries to all these Europeans and other Westerners. And that's the basis of the story of yung Last Samurai, the Last Samurai. In this particular case, Last Samurai, it was the story of military advisors who were paid a lot of money to train their army, but they had a huge number of other people that they imported from Europe to teach metallurgy. Mga how to make trains, etc., etc. They brought a lot of British people, so that the know-how would be brought in. So it's not just the money that they needed. They already had the money, but they just needed that know-how.
Kasi may saying yung sila nung time na yun di ba? Nakalimutan ko na yung exact phrasing, pero it was like something like
strong army, a strong economy, parang rich country.
It was Western learning,
Japanese spirit or something like that.
Yeah, but Japanese spirit.
Yeah.
So they were open kasi nga na-realize nila na pag-iwanan na sila.
Yes.
And so nung na-reform yung empire, na nagkaroon ng emperor ulit, that's why it's called the Meiji Restoration. They before it was the shogunate, and then they unified Japan more or less, and then they restored the emperor. They realized that they needed to westernize quickly.
Yes.
So I think that period was within a 50-year period, nabago talaga. And they also sent Japanese outside.
Yes, they brought a lot of Japanese to study.
Like there was this princess yata or may member ng nobility pinadala sa US, tapos naging ordinaryong tao lang siya doon. Basta para lang, just not even just technology, just culture and all of that, na-expose sila so that when they came back, they would bring it with them.
Yes.
So yun, within a short span of time, nag-modernize ang Japan. So it entered the modern era. So yun yung mindset na kung tawagan. Kaya it has to start with your mindset kasi mahirap kung sasabihin natin tong mga let's open up, let's allow. If people don't shift in their mindset, they won't be receptive to that kind of Kasi nga in the 1899 Malolos Constitution, foreigners were allowed to practice any profession.
Yes. And even own businesses.
In any trade, subject to the local laws of the land.
Yes.
Ngayon, sinasabi natin, dahil that was made by the revolution.
Yeah.
Di ba sila? Ngayon, kung ina-expel na natin yung mga sila, bakit natin linagay and after 400 years nung colonization, bakit napakabukas nila nung time na yon, na they would say na any foreign national can come here and practice their profession. Napakabukas di ba? So, it was actually nung 1902, the Philippine Organic Act ng when the Americans had, basically, katapusan na ng Philippine-American War, gumawa sa Kongreso ng Amerika, gumawa na sila ng Organic Act para sa Pilipinas. Kumbaga, ino-normalize na nila yung bansa. So they had to create like what is a constitution for the Philippine territory under the Americans. So yun yung Philippine Organic Act noong 1902. The president at the time was McKinley. He was a Republican. And the problem he had was the members of the Congress, the Democrats, were opposed to colonizing the Philippines because they were afraid na magko-compete yung mga farmers natin sa mga farmers dun sa South, kung tawagin yung Pixie South, di ba? Yung mga former slave-owning states dun, no? Na, okay. Kasi katatapos lang ng Civil War sa Amerika eh. I mean,
Reconstruction yun
18 yun. So, the slaves were the African Americans were emancipated, so they had to pay them now.
They had to pay them.
Okay. So ngayon, especially the sugar growing farmers in America. So may problema si McKinley. The Republicans, si Lincoln, he fought slavery. But yung mga opponents ng Democrat na pro-slavery, natalo sila. Pero it was reversed back then eh.
Yeah, it was very much reversed, yeah.
Okay, so sabi nila, hindi namin ipapasayan kung takot kami eh. Mai-import dahil free trade na yun eh. Kung naging teritoryo ng US ang Pilipinas, wala nang barrier sa trade. Papasok yan. They will flood us with sugar. The sugar at that time was the commodity, di ba? Anyway, nag-insert sila ng provision sa Philippine Organic Act parang sweetener. Sorry for the pun. Americans are not allowed to own large tracts of land, more than 1,000 hectares of land, or engage in banking, or yung franchises, yung mining, yung utility. They purposefully did that para pumayag yung Democrat. Okay, sige. Sakupin na natin ang Pilipinas. Dahil nanalo yung presidenteng Republican eh. Yung mga katipunero, inaabangan nila yung election eh. Para ngayon, yung sinong mananalo sa state. Like ngayon sa Ukraine, gihintay nila. Si Trump ba? Ang nanalo Republican, sasakupin talaga nila tayo. So, nung nangyari yon, bumigay na yung mga revolusyonaryo rito. So, yun ang naging trade-off ng mga Kano. Kasi ang gusto lang naman ng Kano is may trading post sa China, may base dito sa Subic and Clark, and para mag-guarantee nga yung trading post and, may for religious reasons, whatever, ganyan. Ganon, magka-outpost sa Asia, which until now is really paying them dividends. No? So anyway, yun yung sweetener. Kaya nagkaroon ng foreign restriction sa Pilipinas. Ngayon, after 1902, 1910, nagka-election na, Kongreso. Sino yung tumakbo? Yung mga local na
oligarchs.
Na siya naman yung mga head naman ng revolusyon di ba? So sila na ngayon yung nanalo. Nung nasa kongreso na sila, mag-i-issue na sila ng mga mining permit, utility. Sino yung in-issuean nila ng mga ganon? Di sila rin. Natuto ngayon. Ganito pala yon. I-restrict natin yung mga, since may restriction naman talaga, sila lang yung nakinabang. So in fact, there was a study run by Harvard that after the Americans did land reform in the Philippines, the concentration of wealth, it became even more concentrated, yung land ownership, after they bought the lands from the
The
friars.
friars. Yeah, yeah.
And the cost of buying that had to be repaid somehow, not by the U.S. Congress or the U.S. taxpayer. They made the locals, they had to pay it back. And so who could afford to do that? De syempre, yung local wealthy principales lang. And so naging super concentrated yung wealth, yung ownership ng lupa sa ating bansa sa kanila. And so ever since the 1902, 1935, 1972, 87 ang pinakahuli, palawak yung mga areas kung saan may mga foreign restrictions niyan na may mga provision sa ating constitution. And so hindi ka na talaga magtataka na napag-iiwanan na tayo. Dahil yung mga karatig bansa natin dito sa ASEAN ay bukas sa ganung klaseng pag-i-import, pagdala ng investor and negosyante at professional sa kanilang bansa, at tayo ay pahigpit ng pahigpit. Kaya tayo napag-iiwanan na ng mga bansa katulad ng Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand noong 1980s, Indonesia noong 2000s, ngayon Vietnam na
Grabe.
overtake na tayo ng 2020. Sila yung latest, no? Whereas noong 1985, Vietnam's per capita GDP was only 1/3 of the Philippines. 1/3 in 1985.
Grabe.
And then in 86, nagbukas sila with the 𝗕𝗏𝗴𝗱
reforms.
Tayo naman, inadapt natin yung 87
Constitution
na naghigpit. The most
yun nga, baliktad.
constitution that we have had so far is the 87 Constitution.
I was just going to say, Doy, pinag-usapan din namin yan with Attorney Abad. We were just saying that about yung bang 1986 was that divergence point where Vietnam decided to do the right things, whereas the Philippines went the wrong way. Parang sila nagbukas, naging open to foreign investors, tayo naman nag-expand ng mga restrictions, and the rest is history. Nakita natin.
Well,
baliktad.
Yeah, and to think na they fought a war with
the US.
The US, as late as the 1960s, di ba? And yet they were the first ones to, if you go to Vietnam today, how should I put it? Lahat ng mga nag-relocate out of China,
mga American companies,
into Southeast Asia, they're all going to Vietnam.
Oo.
To Da Nang in particular. The latest, so the Japanese are so heavily investing in the infrastructure, in the city of Da Nang, yung infrastructure, dinidevelop yung mga highway doon, logistics. Da Nang is between Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi, it's Hanoi. In the middle, and it is the one that is being developed now. The billions of foreign direct investment are pouring into Vietnam at the moment. At the same time, the Philippines this year, negative yung ating FDI growth, di ba? Kasi sabi nga nila, yung Chacha, wag mo muna yan. Hayaan muna natin, may Public Service Act tayo, yung kapapasa lang nung bago nag-COVID or during COVID yata, that redefines what a utility is,
lang yan eh. It's actually just a cosmetic, it's like a workaround, a cosmetic workaround.
Kasi nga, the Constitution says sa utilities, it has to be, ano ba yung
60% owned by Filipinos,
national,
Filipino citizens,
Filipino citizen, kung utility. So all they did with the PSA Act was they defined what a utility is.
And they
So-
would say, para ma-exempt ito, and they're not a utility, they are a public service, which is different. Yeah.
Kaya PSA ang
Oh, they are public services. They're not utilities, and it's utilities that are restricted by the 60/40.
yes.
So they're saying, oh,
So-
if we redefine that particular industry as a service and not a utility, then okay sila, pasok sila. So parang yun lang ang ginawa nila.
So yung isang mahalagang sektor na deregulate by this PSA is supposedly the energy producer. Energy generation is no longer a utility, which is very strange, ano? Ang naging utility na lang, ang naiwan kasi ay yung distribution,
Oo, distribution, yeah.
meaning yung electric wires, yung
Oo.
poles, yung ganon. Yun ang utility as defined. Now, I'm going to explain why that is still a problem. So yun ang subject sa 60/40, yung the National Grid Corporation, I think there's a, that anyway, it's like partly foreign owned by China, but they're trying to find a new one. But anyway, so now energy is opening up.
Mm.
Generation, you have investments in particularly renewable, left, right, and center by foreigners. I attended the ADB Clean Energy Summit here, which is an annual thing. Pasok ako. May presentation, USAID and the Philippines. Ganda. Merong group, Aboitis. Yun. Nag-signing daw sila. Okay. Joint signing sa US pa to do a feasibility study. And so, in short, ang daming interest from, and I was talking to a trade attaché at the US Embassy. I mean, there's so much, but the problem is, so we have to double in just the current growth rate. We have to double it kasi may mawawala
Mawala, oo.
na source. So we have to double generation. Now, the investment is going into renewable. The problem is that once you reach a critical point, for you to have high penetration of renewals, you need a smart grid. Why?
That's the
Because
distribution part.
My state, South Australia, we experienced this. We are the largest renewable energy state. We had about 75%. And sometimes it reaches 100%. Demand and supply ng energy is so sensitive. You have to keep it constantly at the same level.
You have to match
Otherwise,
them.
the whole system magkaka-blackout.
Yeah.
So now the problem is you have a variable energy source, renewable. There are times in the day, in the year, na mataas. There are times na mababa siya. So you have to regulate. So that supply, but your demand is fixed, no? So gumaganon siya. So how do you manage that? You need the peaking capacity, natural gas or hydrogen or nuclear, as my friend Marco Anco would love to say. Now, to keep it stable, let alone to provide the 50% additional, but to keep it stable. Now, to prevent those blackouts, you need a smart grid that will allow you, when pag masyadong mataas yung generation, i-manage yung i-lower. Either is switch off mo yung solar or you prevent households from feeding into the grid. May mga boxes na kinakabit sa bahay na kapag peak masyadong malaki ng generation, isi-switch off mo yon.
Mm-hmm.
That's if we can't export the energy, because in some states like ours, we can export it to the neighboring state. There's a connection now being built between Singapore and Central Australia solar to supply Singapore with power. So if you cannot export it anywhere, you have to switch it off.
Otherwise, you're gonna have an overflow, parang surge, parang ano.
If it goes too low, you have to signal to the base load power generators to switch on. And that could be like 5 minutes at a time. Now, your grid has to be smart in order to detect that. Now, our grid, our distribution is still a utility.
Yeah, and that's the problem, because the grid is the distribution point. And since the distribution is a utility, it's subject to the 60/40. And therefore, it will not have the ability to upgrade as fast, because we're stuck with the local
You know,
the
in
local
fact, what's
families.
preventing take-up of rooftop solar in the country is the distributors.
Oh
Why?
my gosh.
Because when you read the 𝗕𝗃𝗴𝗱 law, it's written in the law that if an ordinary household, ang taas ng kuryente ngayon, di ba?
Oh.
Taas kasi ng presyo ng langis. Yung kuryente, it's all tied to power, to oil, di ba? So, may mga ibang, you know, household owners na gustong magpagabit ng solar para makatipid. Ang tatanungin sa'yo na, may tao ba sa bahay during the day kapag may araw? May tao ba? Bakit? Kasi hindi sulit na mag-feed in ka sa grid eh. Unang-una, napakababa ng feed-in tariff. Pangalawa, hihingan ka ng distribution impact statement that will add 35,000 to 50,000 pesos to the cost of your rooftop solar. Emanahin mo yun. That would be like adding 10% to the cost of installing solar panels on your roof. So ang ina-advise sa iyo, kung may tao sa bahay gumagamit ng kuryente, gamitin mo na lang yung gine-generate mo. Hindi na natin i-connect sa grid. Hindi ka na mag-feed in dahil hindi ka nagagastos ng 35 to 50,000. Ngayon, kung walang tao pumapasok na nasa eskwelahan na nagtatrabaho, hindi sulit. Hindi sulit na maglagay ka doon. Dahil doon sa tinaas na nga ng 10%, yung ROI mo, hindi mo makukuha sa feed-in lang during the day. Huwag ka na, hindi na sulit. So that is what's actually preventing the adoption of new technology in the country. It's the rules, the 𝗕𝗃𝗴𝗱 law, which is in need of, it's 20-year-old law, which was crafted, and guess who crafted, guess whose input counted when the lawmakers were, so, and matagal nang sinasabi nito ng Bloomberg, New Energy, you know, group, that you need to fix that, pero hindi pa rin hanggang ngayon. I wonder why. Kasi
𝗕𝗃𝗴𝗱 was supposed to have been a kind of stopgap measure, diba? Back then, it was created to address the blackouts that were happening before.
Yes.
So it was kind of like it was a reaction to a particular crisis during that time. But then it needs to be upgraded.
It needs to be modernized.
It needs to be
Kasi
modernized.
that time wala pa yung smart grid, wala.
Yeah, those concepts didn't exist back then.
Kailangan, if we're gonna make the energy, and remember, the Philippines signed up dun sa Paris na we have to generate parang, what is it, 50% carbon, 50% renewable by 2030. We only have 7 years left. We have about 7 years left to make that transition. And we cannot make that even 50%, maga-unstable na yung grid mo eh. Because I remember in South Australia, it was when we people used to say you cannot breach 50% and have a stable grid. Well, we did that with solar and wind power. But we were only able to manage it by modernizing the grid.
The grid, yeah.
Now it's fine if the government owns it 100 and is able to invest in it. But the problem is, it's not able to. Kaya nga humingi pa ng co-investment yung gobyerno eh. In fact, it wants the Chinese to divest dun sa National Grid Corporation. But then who is going to replace them? Yun ang problema natin ngayon. So, I mean, and it's still subject to this 60-40, even if they allow private players to come in. So that is still a limiting factor dun sa ating green transition. So sabihin natin lahat sa mga environmentalists dyan na lumalaban dun sa pagbukas ng San Miguel, ng coal plant, ng natural gas, yung nagrarally or pumupunta sa Supreme Court, the same people who oppose that also oppose what we're advocating for on the grounds that it is not nationalistic, it is not patriotic daw. But I'm saying to you, ano yung magiging kinahihinatnan natin nun kapag nagka-blackout uli tayo dahil pinapasok natin yung investment sa renewable as per what the President Marcos said he wants to do. He wants, you remember, siya nga yung sa windmill, yun yung
Windmill
campaign.
eh.
He is pro-renewable. And he's pro-committed to the Paris Accord. However, you can, even with all the even supposing all the investment comes in through the PSA, the grid is still going to be a problem.
That's the bottleneck. That's the bottleneck.
Kasi yun yung tulay eh.
Yeah.
Kumbaga, unless magkakaroon tayo ng islands of hindi eh. Yun yung tulay eh. Parang
That's
yun
the
yung
distribution system.
Yung kuryente eh. That's how it is maintained, the stability of the grid. So, mahihirapan tayo dyan.
That's a problem. Ay, nako, grabe talaga. So talagang, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
So, I mean, yeah, what's happening here is talagang ang daming kailangan baguhin. But the thing that's preventing the reforms from happening is, well, there's a large parang unwillingness to change the mindset relating to
Mindset talaga eh.
Mindset talaga eh.
Alam mo, nakikinig ako rito kay 𝗕𝗂𝗴𝗴𝗲𝗀, yung retired investment banker. Meron kasi akong kaibigan noon eh, na I think kamag-anak niya, si John. He appears sa one of the cable channels regularly on the Market Watch, parang ganun. Ang sinabi niya sa mga contacts niya, bakit wala tayong manufacturing dito? Bakit walang, he said, may mga tumitingin ngayon sa Pilipinas because of the rebalancing, de-risking from China.
Oo.
May tumitingin. Hindi naman lahat bias sa atin at bakit sila pumupunta sa Vietnam. Especially, nagsa-sign up tayo sa EDCA. Bakit walang pumapasok dito ng mga investors, no? Ang dahilan daw, napakamahal ng kuryente sa Pilipinas. Anong gagawin mo kapag 40% ng overhead mo nasa kuryente? Talagang totoo naman if you're engaged in an energy-intensive manufacturing like steel or refrigeration, kung cold storage, agriculture. Yung fish, ita-transport mo, iko-cold storage mo. Ang biggest cost mo ay kuryente ng refrigeration. Yung may-ari ng fish pond, nakausap ko recently sa Pampanga, may pump sila sa ilog, katabi ng Pampanga River. So kapag umulan, bumagyo, pinapump out nila yung tubig. Kapag drought naman, El Nino, ini-irrigate nila, pinapump in nila. So ano yun? Motor, diesel.
Kuryente.
Kuryente rin yun. So malaking cost ng inflation natin, malaking cost kung bakit walang investor is the energy. That for me, that's the first problem that's the growth, the binding constraint. Is that power. Power is the problem. So as we have just been talking about for now in this little while, what is preventing our energy sector from modernizing? Well, a big part of it through the years has been the
60/40, exactly.
And even with the Public Sector Act, we still have a problem.
Exactly. So yun yung parang ang importante talaga at punot dulo talaga ng problema ng Pilipinas, yung 60/40 in terms of economic kasi kahit sabihin ng ibang tao, hindi naman yung investment ang reason it's because of the cost of electricity. Pero pag tiningnan pa rin natin yung cost of electricity, ano yung pinanggalingan ng problemang yun? 60/40 pa rin.
Lack of investment, and then the know-how now kasi yung smart grid, I'll bet you the local players don't know how to implement that.
Sige. Siya nga pala, so Doy, we could probably continue this on Tuesday or kasi yun nga, we're at the ending mark. So guys, ladies and gentlemen, maraming salamat sa inyong pagtangkilik sa aming show ngayon. We will continue this really, really good conversation we're having with Dr. Doy Santos. Doy, maraming salamat sa iyo ulit sa oras. So, thank you everyone. Thank you. Subaybayan natin ang Pugad Vloggers. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat.
Salamat po. Thank you. Thanks, Orion.
Pugad Vloggers.